What does this large-scale monogram B-52 model, this Revell S kit of the Bell X-2, and an Aurora Famous Fighters F-7F Tiger Cat model all have in common? Let's find out on Celebrating Aviation with Mike Machat. We're going to have some fun with this. What these three models have in common is that they never existed, but we sure would have liked them to. Models we wished we'd had in the heyday of plastic kits. Let's dive in. If your Saturday mornings look like this, assembled with your friends at the local hobby shop, you're going to enjoy this episode. These kids grew up into being something called glue troopers. Yeah, these are the guys that watch Max's Models, best modeling channel on YouTube. Shout out to Max and all the great glue troopers. We all started with this, and our hobby launched careers in aviation, careers in the military, educated us about all the wonderful stuff in the aerospace industry that was happening in the 1950s and 1960s. Now, these are the big three. Ford, Chrysler, General Motors. We talked about the big three in the 50s, but for us kids, the big three were Revell, Aurora, and Monogram. That was our world. Now, my personal involvement in modeling and producing things for the model industry started when I was an artist at the Douglas Aircraft Company in Long Beach, and I was designing decals for factory models like this. That led to other decal work and eventually illustration jobs for Lodella, Revell of Mexico. And I had the privilege of working on a series of airliners for that great company. And so having built models as a kid and then getting to illustrate them later on was kind of a dream come true. And what I thought I would do with this episode is take my own artwork and turn it into model kits we would have loved to have seen. For instance, here's an F-86 at Edwards, 1951. If I isolate the airplane, it's a flight test airplane. It's got the data booms. And so I'll change that and add some lettering. And I have a Lindbergh kit of the F-86 Sabre. Here's another one, Concorde over Hong Kong at the turn of the century. And we take that art and change it into a Revell S kit. Now, Revell eventually had a model of the Concorde, but this would have been what it looked like when the airplane was first introduced. Kind of fun. Now, I should address something here. This is a European airplane over a city in the Far East. Great. I've had a number of comments, more than several, about the fact that my channel is focused pretty much on U.S. aviation. I've had a lot of comments about why I'm not covering more international subjects. Well, I live in Los Angeles, California. I've had a lifetime career in the aerospace industry, and I've amassed a pretty good archive of photos and material on American aircraft. So that being said, let me start tonight's presentation with a salute to my international subscribers. What would have happened if there was a Frog 196th scale Blackburn Beverly? That would have been a really cool kit. And the Frog airliners were magnificent back in the 50s. If you're into fighters, how about an Airfix Blackburn Buccaneer doing what they called a level check in the UK? Beautiful airplane. A French Heller kit. Now, the Caravels were modeled by a number of different companies. So they generally were the Model 3 and maybe even a Model 6. But I don't recall seeing models of the Super 10 or 12, which had the Pratt turbofan engines. So this is my Heller Caravel kit. And this is fun. This is a fictitious vehicle that was intended to be used by Japanese Maritime Patrol Forces, the Phalanx Dragon. This was a company based in California that had a whole series of these VTOL type machines. And of course, they never came to be, but rendering them was fun. So this would be a neat Hasegawa kit. From Germany, a Faller Messerschmitt Me-163 Comet. Comet's actually an interceptor, but that's what they had on the cover, or would have. And this brings us to the Boeing B-52 shown over March Air Force Base, the city of Riverside, which was actually a B-52B. And this brings up an interesting point. Why is it a B-52F? Because the art director thought the F looked better on the cover. Sometimes that did happen. But it's a painting that was done for an art exhibit in Riverside years ago. And it's interesting how the lettering integrates into the composition. It worked out really well. I added more B-52s on the ramp than there really were. And let's talk about that giant 1/32 scale. Now, Monogram, as many of you know, had a 1/72 B-52, which was a pretty good sized chunk of plastic. Beautiful model. But if we expanded that up to 1/32 scale on a tall tail 52, the wingspan of the model would be 5 feet 9 inches. So that means the box would have been about 4 feet long. And thank goodness Dad had one of these to get it home from the hobby shop. Monogram had a series of 1/48 fighters. They were really beautiful, Navy, Army, and I thought I'd add the P-40 to that list. Monogram also did a number of really beautiful missile kits. They always had the ground launching equipment, the tractors and the figures, and they were just beautiful kits to build. So the one they didn't do, which I'm adding, is the X-10. The Navajo was actually a later version of what this was. The X-10 was an experimental flight test missile. It's remotely piloted by the rear seater in the T-33 that you see in the upper right. And people ask me about this world's first Mach 2 jet. Yes, it was. It beat the F-104 Starfighter by 3 weeks to that speed. Monogram did a bunch of airliners. They had TWA Connie and DC-3, beautiful kits. So I'm adding a Douglas DC-7C in Braniff markings. But what if that TWA Connie had been made by Comet? Cover might have looked like this. Now, sometimes model companies would get in trouble. They would get a jump on wanting to be the first on the market with a new airliner. And so they'd use markings that were actually updated. This is what the original Eastern DC-8 was thought to have looked like. And then this is the actual color scheme designed by Raymond Loewy. Fly Eastern's Golden Falcon jet. Well, if Aurora, which had a series of large airliner kits, ever had this scheme as an artist rendering, it would look like this. And the DC-8B, it's an interesting name because Eastern was the first to introduce the DC-7B. They adapted that to the DC-8, but there were some litigation efforts from other airlines saying that wasn't right. It wasn't ever an official designation. And lo and behold, Eastern had to remove the B designation from the DC-8, which was painted at one time very briefly on the airplanes. So if Aurora had the DC-8, Lindbergh had some airliner models, and so I gave them the Pan Am 707, 168 parts. That would have been fun. This is a buildup of the Lindbergh Republic CB. It was built by Craig Kodera, and the CB kit was issued in about 1952-53 timeframe by Lindbergh. It was fun to build. But what would have happened if they reissued it as the Republic Demonstrator, which was called the Red Dragon? And it had this real snazzy paint job. It's shown here at Lake Tahoe in my painting. That would have been fun to build. Aurora famous fighters, nothing more famous than an F-82 twin Mustang used in Korea. Or how about an F-7F Tiger Cat? Beautiful airplane. And then there's this beast, the Vought Crusader 3, XF8U-3, it was intended to be the ultimate Crusader, fastest single engine Navy jet at Mach 2.39. And I made it up as a Hawk kit. You remember they had a bunch of smaller scale fighters, the F-4D Skyray, the XF-92 experimental Delta Wing. And I thought this would really fit nicely on a Hawk kit. This brings us to flight test, and we're going to get into the Revell S kits from the mid and late 1950s. The F-107A, nicknamed the Ultra Sabre, that was never a formal designation. North American built 3 of them to propose to the Air Force. They were not put in production, but they were used by NASA. And the machine that you see here on this model cover was the first airplane ever to be flown with the side stick controller when they were supporting the X-15 program. That would have been a beautiful model. Aurora had a smaller scale model, but it wasn't in these markings. And then if you have a 107, you got to have an F108. This is a Craig Kodera illustration, originally done as a cover for Air Power magazine. And I morphed it into a Revell S kit. That was one of his Christmas presents years ago, but very believable and would have made a beautiful model, scaled from official plans. Oh yeah, my favorite X-plane, the Bell X2. And oh gosh, can you imagine a Revell S kit of that? They had the X3, they had the Skyrocket, but the X2 never made it into the final cut. And you notice over on the left here, it says flown to 126,000 feet, will be first to Mach 3. And again, in this imaginary cover, what that meant is the model was released around September 10th or 12th, right after Ivan Kinchlow had flown the airplane to 126,000 feet, becoming first of the spacemen, but the airplane had not yet reached Mach 3, which would have happened on September 27th. Secret stealth jet. The Scorpion test squadron was these gray painted F-117s that were flown from Groom Lake, Nevada, Lockheed test program. And I thought a Revell kit might look like this. Here's another Phalanx design. Again, a fictitious stealth attack copter, never built, but non-camo, and one can dream. All right, what are ships doing in an airplane video? Well, growing up in New York on the west side of Manhattan, every weekend you'd see the magnificent classic liners, and you'd drive down the West Side Highway up there and you'd look at all these magnificent ships. So I decided I would do a model of the QE2. This was a private commission painting and I morphed it into a cover, but that would have been a fun Revell kit. And now we come to king of the fantasy box art artists, Mr. Rusty Cowart. This is a Lockheed CL-288 concept, and Rusty did this as a Sidewinder firing jet interceptor. You can see the enemy airplane going down in the background. This is adapted from Revell's 104 reissue with Sidewinder missiles. But Rusty has turned this into kind of a mini industry in his beautiful covers. And let's take a look at a few of his. The Vought Vindicator as an Aurora kit. A Braniff supersonic transport. And this is interesting because, believe it or not, Braniff flew the Concorde. It was never in these markings. The airplane never appeared in these colors. This was just a promo ad. It was either British Airways or Air France airplane used for interline service from Europe, London and Paris, would land in Dulles Airport in Washington, D.C., and then they would change the registration and fly it on to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport as a Braniff flight. I took that in April of 1979. The flight is flown subsonic over the U.S. at 0.95 Mach, although we hit 9.8. And one-way fare on the Concorde, full afterburner takeoff, first class service, $179. Yeah, I know. This is a picture of our airplane after we landed at DFW, and here you can see why they call it the Beast. It was a fun experience. All right, this is a Bell concept based on German engineering and technology. Would have been called the XF-109, one of the last of the Century series. And this was a VTOL rotating engine pod design for the Air Force and the Navy. And Rusty worked up a gift set of both these airplanes flying over Edwards Air Force Base. Pretty cool. And speaking of Edwards, this is my mural at the Air Force Flight Test Center Museum on base. And photographer and digital artist Tony Landis made this into the ultimate X-plane gift set, 8 supersonic X-planes to build, and even included the side panels, which is kind of cool. He's got it priced at $2.98, a pretty good value. But that would have been fun and would have been at least a week's worth of building, I'm sure. This is a rare color photo of the Republic XR-12 Rainbow. It was a photo recon prototype. I've done other videos about this airplane, but it was intended to be an airliner as well. It's the fastest 4-engine piston-powered aircraft ever flown, 462 miles an hour at 40,000 feet. And the airliner version would have been called the RC-2 Rainbow. So Tony Landis here has done it in American Airlines markings, flagship New York, of course. But what could be better than a profile of an American Republic Rainbow than one of Rusty's model covers of an Adams RC-2 Rainbow, my personal favorite. And I thought we'd close with a series of Rusty's kits. These exquisite pieces are they're fantastic. He makes the boxes, which you'll see in a moment, and his artwork just literally brings any modeler's fantasies to life. Let's take a look. Here's the Vought proposal that was eventually won by the F-14. But again, just like the box wraps in the 50s, Rusty has taken the artwork and put it on a box, making it look just like a real Revell model. Check this out. Looks like you're in the hobby shop. The boxes do not contain the kit, obviously. They're empty, but they're beautiful pieces to look at. And you could have quite a shelf in your office or studio with these things. And I'll mention here that Rusty has a website coming up, and I have put his contact information with his permission in the title block. And you can contact him, and maybe even he'd custom make some models for you. But at one time he was selling these on eBay, and I'm sure he'll bring those back. So you can contact him with the info below. And not only the models, but buildups. This is, I'm guessing, the decals from a Delta 880 Hawk kit made into a Viscount 800. Love the markings on the engine nacelles. That's pretty cool. And of course, this is the window display you'd see in a hobby shop. So no, these models never happened, but we can dream about them. And they would have been some really cool kits to build back in the day. But there you have it, a look at kind of a fantasy Twilight Zone world of models that never came to be. Special thanks to Tony Landis, Rusty Cowart, Sean Day of Revell Models, and Max of Max's Models. And thank you so much for celebrating aviation with Mike Machado. I hope you enjoyed this episode. We'd love to have you on board as a subscriber, and please do hit the like button on the way out. And as always, until next time, take care.